All right, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about Section 2, the politics of the war. And the computer's a little bit slow today. I think everybody's a little bit slow here at the beach. Um, this particular section involves more than just battles and generals and things of that nature, it's the things behind it. If you remember in the first part, we talked about how the war was fought over slavery. We also talked about how the um, for the people fighting the war, that wasn't necessarily the cause. But during the war, it was definitely fought over slavery. But foreign countries didn't get that. A lot of people didn't get that, and it's Abraham Lincoln is going to change that with his passage of the Emancipation Proclamation. After Lincoln fired General McClellan, he turned to Ambrose Burnside to lead the Union forces. And yes, if you look at Burnside's hair, that is where we get the term sideburns, believe it or not. A lot of people started growing that hairstyle after seeing him. Britain was no longer dependent on the South for cotton. Egypt and India were now producing cotton at a larger rate than the South, and the northern wheat and corn that the British were getting from the North were just as important as cotton. And this is huge because the South had depended upon cotton in order to get the British support, and the British still gave us some ships and things of that nature, but for the most part, they remained neutral. And then there's the Trent Affair. This isn't showing up well on the screen, but that's the Trent Affair. Confederates sent two diplomats to Britain to gain support aboard the ship the Trent. American warship stopped the ship and arrested the two men. Both Britain said, "You can't stop one of our ships to get anybody off." The Americans said these were rebels, so there was a little bit of a standoff, and Britain threatened war against the United States if they didn't release these two Confederate diplomats. There's a story that British troops were actually boarding ships for Canada while the band was playing Dixie. To avoid war, Lincoln released the two men. Lincoln did not like slavery, but felt the federal government didn't have the power to abolish it in the existing slave states without a constitutional amendment. He believed the Civil War's main objective is to save the Union. It's been reported that Lincoln said that if he could save the Union without freeing a single slave, he would. If he could save the Union by freeing all the slaves, he would. But as the war began to move on, Lincoln evolved. He also understood how important it was to give the North a firm moral cause. And ending slavery became a weapon of the war. Emancipation would discourage strongly the British and others from helping the Confederates. So on January the 1st, 1863, Lincoln passed the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, the Emancipation Proclamation did not free the slaves in states that remained loyal to the Union, only to the rebel states. And in reality, it didn't apply to anybody because the rebel states were under rebel control. And the areas of those rebel states that were occupied by the Union, the Emancipation Proclamation did not necessarily apply. But for the North, it gave the war a complete moral purpose. Now, again, nobody was hiding the fact that it was generally fought over slavery anyway, but this definitely gave it that purpose. Free blacks were now allowed to enlist in the Army. Northern Democrats believe it will prolong the war by antagonizing the South. The Confederates were outraged and more determined than ever now to win. There were problems on both sides. In Maryland, Lincoln suspended the right of habeas corpus, a court order that requires authorities to be held without bail. Basically, if you were pro Confederate in Maryland, you were arrested without a trial. And they arrested people that were called Copperheads. Copperheads were Northern Democrats who wanted peace with the South. Jefferson Davis denounces Lincoln's actions, then suspends habeas corpus himself. So he basically followed the lead after being critical of it. Both sides enacted conscription. Conscription is another word for the draft, and it forces people to serve. Both sides allowed men to pay $300 for a substitute. However, very few members of the Army were draftees, about 10% on both sides. Most did volunteer. In the summer of 1863 in New York City, poor white workers, mainly Irish, protest against the draft. They believe it's unfair that they should have to fight a war to free slaves who will compete with them for jobs. When they begin to be drafted, mobs rampage through the cities. Mobs attack the draft offices, the police, Republicans, anti slavery leaders, the rich, and African Americans. Hundreds were dead. A lot of black people were just butchered by Irish mobs in New York. Many were lynched. Federal troops went in to end the riots, but over 100 were dead. If you've seen the movie Gangs of New York, there's a good part of that in there. That concludes section 2. We'll begin section 3 with our next segment, Life During Wartime.